Hello, everyone, and welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and I'm really glad you're here with me today for episode number 324. I'm going to be sharing with you an interview I did with Quinn Galloway Salazar about caring for veterans at the end of life. I think you'll find it very interesting, and this is an appropriate time to be sharing it since in a few days here in the U.S. we will be celebrating Veterans Day. So it's a good time to remember our veterans. And Quinn reminds us in my interview with her that this is not just work we need to think about once a year. It needs to be ongoing because we really need some major changes in how we care for our veterans. And we also talk about suicide prevention. So I think you'll find it interesting. Before we begin, I want to thank all of my supporters on my page at Patreon, patreon.com/EOLU, who've been making monthly or annual contributions to help keep this podcast on the air. Thank you so much. Your support means everything to me. And I just recently uploaded a new end of life news update for you that you'll be able to receive or access on the Patreon page. Also, I should be having a couple of movie reviews that I do with my husband coming out fairly soon. We have a couple that we've watched that we're ready to record. So hopefully those will be available for you too as a little bonus and a thank you for your contributions. I also want to mention my other podcast, What Really Matters, Everyday Spirituality, where for the next few weeks, I'm talking about the shadow, working on our own shadow, recognizing the shadow, and healing our inner wounds. So if that's of any interest to you, you can check out What Really Matters podcast. I will leave a link for it in the show notes for this episode, which you will find at eolupodcast.com. Just look for episode number 324. So now we'll move on with my interview with Quinn Galloway Salazar. Remember, I'll come back for a few takeaways and to say goodbye after the interview. So here we go. Today, I'm very happy to welcome my guest, Quinn Galloway Salazar. Quinn is a behavioral health and end-of-life professional with a strong passion for serving those that served, as an Army veteran herself and a spouse to a retired combat veteran currently serving in law enforcement. Her background serving the military veteran population also has included working in federal and state agencies, the military, and academia on strengthening behavioral health systems for service members, veterans, and their families, and developing strategic plans to reduce suicide amongst the military and veteran population. Quinn's latest passion project has been to become an end-of-life doula specializing in veteran care. She also partners with end-of-life professionals and consults on topics related to the needs of veterans and their families facing end-of-life challenges, and she volunteers with hospice serving veterans and their caregivers. Quinn has a doctoral degree in industrial and organizational psychology, specializing in forensic consulting, a Master of Arts degree in professional counseling, and a Bachelor of Science in criminal justice. And you can come to the show notes for this episode, and there will be a link there to Quinn's brand new website that isn't quite up and running yet, but by the time this episode airs, it will be, and there will be a link in the show notes if you want to go to her website. And you can also connect with her on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I'll have links for those on the show notes as well. So Quinn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, Karen, thank you so much for having me. I am so humbled and so thrilled to connect, to get the opportunity to connect with you and to connect with your audience and kind of share this journey.
Well, I'm very excited too, because for quite a while now, I've been wanting to talk about some of the very topics that you have devoted your work to, behavioral health and caring for veterans at the end of life and suicide in the military, all of those topics that you have specialized in. I have been longing to talk about more. And so when you and I got acquainted, it just seemed like the perfect thing that you needed to be a guest on the podcast. podcast, so we could cover as much of these topics as we possibly can in 1 hour.
Absolutely, absolutely. I look forward to doing just that. And thank you so much for your willingness to share just the experiences of veterans at the end of life, and also covering suicide prevention, and also covering the needs of their families and caregivers, and other loved ones that are supporting them along this journey.
Well, I know back in my days in hospice, as a hospice medical director, we took care of quite a few veterans on our service. And I always came away from that experience feeling that we didn't quite do the best job, and that somehow there were things we were missing, but we didn't know what they were. I always felt like there's something more we should have done or could have done, or something we might have known about that we just didn't know. And so that's one of the reasons I really want to cover this topic, because I'm sure there are still end-of-life workers out there who might have that same feeling at times, that same unsettled feeling that we're not doing as much as we could do.
Right, right. Definitely understand.
I wanted to get started, though, by just asking you, because a lot of people in the audience are end-of-life doulas or working in hospice, people who've been kind of called to serve at the end of life. So I just wanted to hear a little bit for you about how you first got inspired to become an end-of-life doula, specializing in veteran care.
Absolutely. Karen, I'm going to take it a little bit further back than that, and share a little bit about my childhood. It's interesting. I around the age of 7 or 8, I had a girlfriend. Well, I have a girlfriend. I'm gonna name her. Her name is Stephanie, and I'm hoping that Stephanie is going to listen to this podcast. But Stephanie and I used to play this game where one of us would assume the responsibility of being a funeral director, while the other assumed the responsibility of being the person that passed away and caring for that individual. Taking that into our early adulthood, Stephanie became a social worker in hospice care, and I took a very small stint after coming off of active duty in working in a funeral home. And so that kind of started this space for me in death care at an early age, having just this inquisitive mind and just this compassion for others, and learning how to practice that at a very young age.
How interesting that you both had the curiosity, it sounds like, but not a lot of fear around it.
Yeah, we didn't. And that's, we recently had a conversation about that. And, it's amazing, because the one thing that we both walked away from that conversation saying was just that, like, how did we know at such a young age that was going to be such an impactful topic in both of our careers? We had no idea, but we knew that we had this interest very young. It was an interest that wasn't amongst our other peers. It was just something that was shared between the two of us. And it was also this notion of wanting to serve a larger cause that was bigger than either one of us. So it's just amazing how our life courses and our journeys have pretty much ended up where we are today doing death care work.
Wow. Yes. And so that makes me almost feel like, well, of course you became an end-of-life doula. It's just obvious.
Who would have ever thought that? But to go back and answer your question about how did I first get interested in becoming an end-of-life doula? Shortly after conducting my interviews for my dissertation, I just recently finished my PhD. I was conducting qualitative interviews with women veterans, and some of their stories that they shared left this angst in me, and it caused me to say, how does some of their traumas that they experienced in service journey with them throughout the course of their life? And how does it show back up towards the end of their life? And I had the opportunity to connect with a health researcher who also is a woman veteran. And I like to, she's my Shiro, but she also is a stage 4 breast cancer. She's living with stage 4 breast cancer, and all of her treatments have not responded. And she said to me, and it was just so impactful, she said to me, those who wander are not always lost. And I didn't fully understand how all of my experiences up to that point, so the last 19 to almost 20 years, shaped my work into taking on this next leg of my work in end of life care. And I always like to bring up the story of my Shiro, primarily because I want to keep her legacy alive. And I know by sharing her words and sharing just the insight that she provided me, my work and my hopes of what this work will look like in the future will be a ripple effect, and it'll also keep her legacy alive.
Wow. That's really beautiful that your eyes were opened in that way to the fact that this woman veteran had specific needs, as you said, that would travel with her throughout her end of life experience, and that you felt called and motivated in a way to want to help her and other veterans like her at the end of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so here I am. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about just death care and death work. And she said, "Are you familiar with death doulas?" And I'm like, "No, what's a death doula?" And she shared it with me. And the researcher in me went on this journey of finding all things end of life, including End of Life University. And I was it just propelled me. And it just felt like, wow, there's a name for this. And there's a fit for me. And I just jumped in. I jumped in.
Wow. And I'm so glad that you have. And it definitely seems like it's the perfect fit and the right place for you to be. I wanted to go back and visit what we were talking about in general, the unique needs of veterans who are facing the end of life, and then more specifically, how the needs of women veterans might differ from those needs of veteran men. Because I was sharing with you earlier in all the images that I see in hospice around caring for veterans, it's almost always focused around men, veteran men. I see men in the photos and the images and the language that's used. And so until you pointed it out to me, it hadn't occurred to me that veteran women might have different needs than men do at the end of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Karen, I mean, just roughly thinking about the estimate numbers of veterans that are currently living, we're looking at 19 million veterans that are currently living, and that's according to recent veteran population data. And so it's important to know that a veteran's military experience really may affect their end of life experience, right? So so we must ask first and foremost, we've got to ask this really big question, right? Asking the question, did you serve, right? Did you serve in the armed forces? Oftentimes veterans may not relate to hearing, are you a veteran? So instead asking a simple basic question, did you serve in the armed forces? Did a loved one close to you serve in the armed forces? Just to get a little bit of information as to what that initial experience was. And if they have, you want to know, which conflict did they serve in? Was it World War II? Was it Korea? Was it Vietnam, which is the largest group of end-of-life care that's happening right now? Were they peacetime veterans, Gulf War veterans, Afghanistan or Iraq? So you want to know a little bit about their specific experience so that you can tailor and know a little bit more about their unique needs. What branch of service did they serve in? Do they have combat or non-combat experience? Not to say that for those who have not experienced combat experiences, that their experience is any less, but there's certain factors that you want to know regarding their combat experience or their non-combat experience. Other unique needs that you want to pay attention to are issues related to their mental health, right? Taking a look at post-traumatic stress. I try to take off the disorder, but oftentimes people will say post-traumatic stress disorder. Are there any suicidal ideations? Moral injury is a topic that comes up quite frequent with veterans at the end of life who have had to partake in, for example, taking a life that went against what they believe. There may be depression, there may be anxiety, there may be substance abuse issues that, really need to be taken care of to be able to serve that veteran. Another piece is symptom management, right? I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into that because you are the medical professional. I am not. But what I do know for sure is how stoicism is such a contributing factor, that fear and pain are seen as signs of weakness in the veteran culture, right? And just ensuring that it's important to be aware that may be a contributing factor and play a part into managing that veteran's pain or their symptoms. I think about Vietnam veterans, once again, they are the largest group right now that are receiving some form of end-of-life care. Just thinking about when they returned home, many of them did not have the opportunity to have a debrief of their experiences, and they were not properly welcomed home. So for a lot of that population, a lot of that war cohort, there's a lot of shame that they feel. A lot of them have isolated and have not shared some of their experiences with others, especially their families. I had a friend whose father actually passed away from Parkinson's disease due to Agent Orange from Vietnam. And towards the end of his life, there was just severe agitation. And he was seeing hallucinations, and his family did not understand. They didn't understand that this was a veteran that was a Bronze Star recipient that saw some things while in combat. Mm-hmm. And so they had to learn to adapt to his new way of being towards the end of his life, and also realizing that there were some things that he saw in war that they were not aware of for their whole lives, right? So my girlfriend, mm-hmm. She's 40. She didn't know that for 38, 37 years. So it's important to know some of what conflicts were they in, some of the mental health issues and some of the symptomologies that are facing them, and knowing that their service is definitely often connected to their identity.
I'm really relating to this, Quinn, and I don't know if you know my story, if you've listened to enough podcasts, but my father died by suicide a number of years ago, and he was a World War II veteran. And when you talked about stoicism, I think that was a big issue with my dad. He didn't know how to ask for help or how to say that he needed help. Again, because that would have been admitting a weakness. And I just realized as you were talking, my dad earned a Purple Heart in World War II, which he didn't want to receive because he said the real heroes are all of the guys in my unit who died, who didn't come home. And the Purple Heart is kind of a badge of shame because I lived and they gave their lives. And so I realized, wow, even the honors we try to give may come with some sort of stigma or shame attached to them.
Mm-hmm. Karen, I have goosebumps, and thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that piece with us all. because that is a prominent story, right? With many of our Purple Heart and Bronze Star recipients, is they feel there's this level of survivor's guilt that they often feel that their battle buddies were left at the battle, and they carry that. They carry that. And I think for so many families, they don't understand that piece because when their veteran returns home, their thought is, this is, my dad, or this is my husband, and he's going to come back, or my wife, or my, whatever the case is that that person serves in lives. And they don't know some of the things and some of the experiences that have occurred while that loved one was in uniform. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's a protective factor for that veteran to not share some of those stories, right? To keep the family safe.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I was thinking about in our hospice, I remember it seemed as though the veteran patients were most likely the ones to be labeled as the difficult patients, like patients who wouldn't talk to us, who would refuse our treatments, who were just more challenging to work with. But I don't think at the time we understood why that might be the case, or had any idea how we might change our approach or what we could do about it. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that. What do we need to do differently when we work with veterans? Besides, like you've already did a really good rundown of the things we should ask and things we need to know about them. But are there other things we should change about how we approach them?
Yeah, I think instituting or implementing volunteer programs, right, where you have that peer approach, that veteran to veteran approach is so important. I've seen as a hospice volunteer myself, I see the importance, and forgive me for what I'm about to say, but I have to be brutally honest. Sometimes I don't know if hospice and palliative care really sees how that camaraderie between a veteran and a veteran really can build a level of trust that the nurse or the doctor or the chaplain may not be able to easily assess, or to build that level of rapport at a rapid pace. And so I think sometimes it's so important to develop these volunteer programs, but to cultivate those relationships, because there's just something about knowing that someone else has served, that there's just almost like this click where it's an instant connection. And I'll use a quick story of my own with one of the gentlemen that I work with. The very first time we talked, he was stoic. I'm going to use the word stoic. And when he asked me, so you're gonna call me, and you're gonna call me how often? And he had all of these questions, right? Because he had so much mistrust that has been built up for years. And I said to him, I will call you for as long as you have breath in your body. And if your family still needs me, I will be there too. And Karen, when we were on a call, and I just felt just this weight just lift off of him, because he felt like there was this connection, and he chewed my head off at first and he spit me out secondly, but I was still there to support him and his family through their journey. And so with that being said, I think it's so important for hospice and palliative care organizations to really look at their volunteer programs, and not only focus on having volunteers that are older, but look at having volunteers that are younger as well, because it's give and take. There's learning that can happen on both fronts. And with that, innovation can spark within our systems to really shape how we care for veterans at the end of life.
That makes so much sense to me, that we should be actively recruiting veterans as volunteers and offering them whatever training they need to serve as a volunteer, but then having our own strategy within the organization for how we are going to proceed in our care of veterans and making sure that we're paying attention to everything that we should notice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it can be done. And I think it can also be done collaboratively, right? With the families being a part, with the veteran volunteer being a part, of course, the unit being a part, and the veteran being at the center of it. And I think, case studies can be done to really help shape what efforts look like and evaluate satisfaction across the board that can really be proven to be best practices in the long term.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me as I'm listening to you. I realize like one of our values in hospice always was making sure people have a chance to tell their stories and talk about whatever they want to talk about. But that as far as, well, for anyone really, but veterans in particular, we also need to honor people's need for silence, that maybe some people don't want to talk about their stories and can't, and that we have to honor that as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is so spot on, right? And not assuming that everyone wants to share, and respecting when they don't want to share, but also being willing to be a lending ear to the family in the event that they want to share, because families serve too. And they have stories of their own that it may be therapeutic for them to get off of their chest and their hearts to share what it's been like for them throughout the course of that veteran's life.
Yeah, that's very true. That's why that's such a good question to ask. Have you served, or has a close loved one served? Because you never know what that person might have experienced if they've been the support person for a veteran throughout their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just, and you brought up the piece about the women veterans, and I want to make it even a little bit more broader than that. And I thought about it after we started sharing. There are veterans that are, in end of life care that are LGBTQ plus. Mm-hmm. There are veterans that are of different religious affiliations, and there's such a diversity of minority veterans that, we can't just look at the male Caucasian veteran, right? We've got to look at it from a context of serving a larger population that's growing. As the military workforce is growing, so is the veteran population is growing. And we've got to be prepared to serve them when they become clients or clients in our care.
And you mentioned to me before we started our call that, you yourself became educated about the fact that service is a little different for women often, and so are the end of life needs that you've witnessed with women. And so I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about some of those differences.
When we think about this population historically and just their role in the military, it initially was shaped on them being nurses or them providing moral support in theaters. But now when we think about this population, they're integrated in various roles to include combat. But oftentimes, even though they're touching various jobs across the landscape of service, they feel invisible. They feel that to society, their service didn't matter as much as a male veteran service mattered. So oftentimes, they don't even self-identify and say, I served. And so it's important to be mindful, and to ask those questions. Ask every client that you have and their family, has your loved one served? Because we're going to start seeing more and more women receiving care. Once again, the Vietnam era, there was a large representation of women veterans, and we're going to start seeing them in our care. Also, we're starting to see a lot of women veterans that are Gulf War, Afghanistan and Iraqi veterans that were exposed to toxic exposures during their combat experiences. And so some of them are being diagnosed with aggressive forms of breast cancer. So we're seeing more of that. We also know that there's a high proportion of women veterans who have experienced some form of military sexual trauma or military sexual assault. And we've got to be mindful as we're working with them that we're, trauma informed is just big. And I know I'm hoping we'll get to that, but just being mindful that some of those things may shape the interaction that you have with that woman veteran. But honor their service. If I can't say anything more, honor their service and let them feel as though their service mattered and they played a huge contribution into the tapestry of all of our service. Really, really big. It's powerful to hear their stories. It empowers them and it allows them to leave a legacy of the work that they've done to help our nation.
And that's such a good reminder that for people who, as you said, may have felt invisible before, to make sure that everyone feels seen. We see you, we hear your story, we recognize what you have offered and what you've given. I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's the same, and it's not the same. So I take that back. But thinking about the LGBTQ plus community, just using them for another example, for so many years, our older veterans experienced the don't ask, don't tell policy, where they couldn't even share their orientation. And for them, they too have felt invisible. Mm-hmm. And so just to give them as well the opportunity to share their stories and how their experiences has shaped and impacted their life and how it plays a part in their end of life care. That's important to make mention of as well.
And really understanding that we're dealing with patients who in many deep ways may feel they don't have that much in common with us if we've never served in the military and we have no idea what they've been through. That may be a challenge for them, receiving care from people who have no idea what they've gone through or what they've experienced and what has influenced them throughout their lives. And so we have to come in the door, I think, being really humble and acknowledging, like, I honestly don't know what it would be like to go through what you've been through, and showing a lot of respect for that fact.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's the same way that I present. I present as an open slate, as a blank slate, rather, because every veteran's experience is completely different. And I'd never want to minimize anyone's experience because, once again, where we serve, our age, our gender, there's so many factors that shape what our whole lived experiences are, that I feel that it's just important to just go in and listen, go in with an open heart, appreciate their service, celebrate some of their accomplishments, and just let them share as they're willing to share. And there's by no means, and Karen, there's a term in the field, and I'm sure it spans all fields, in being culturally competent. And I say all the time, like, we don't need to, cultural competency, I don't know if we ever will be fully competent, but just be aware and just have that open space where you're wanting to learn and you're wanting to hear. And if there are scenarios or instances where you don't know what to do, be okay with saying, I don't have that answer right this minute, but I'm going to get a service or a resource or someone to you that can help with that. And that builds so much trust in that veteran and that veteran's family, just to know that, okay, you matter, you are cared about, and whatever resources that you need via your community or via the VA or the hospice or palliative care organization, your professional is going to help get you that.
I'm glad you mentioned that term cultural competency, because I can imagine that sometimes like we put so much emphasis on training and make sure your organization is culturally competent and that everyone understands various cultures. But sometimes overtraining can keep us all in our heads where we're trying to think about what did I learn? What should I say now? How am I supposed to act right now? And becoming from our heads instead of from our hearts, which is what you're talking about, when we're just fully present and being ourselves with all of our own uncertainties and all of our own feelings of not knowing the right thing to do. And we're so much more authentic and real if we can just be in that space and acknowledge, I just really don't know. I don't know what it would be like to be you, and I'm not sure I know what to say right now, to just be comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I am going to use one of your lines um, from the journey from ego to soul, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, is to really just focus on the present. Just be present, right? Not always thinking of having the answer to the future or what's next, but just being still, taking that deep breath and just be present. Um, that's where that's where that heart work truly comes in. The head work can come in after you have that moment, but at that present time, just being there, just doing that soul to soul heart work.
Yeah, that is really beautiful. And I can just see how valuable your presence is to other veterans, because you bring with you the history of your experience in the military, but then now that you've added on these other pieces and your passion for working with the end of life, it seems like you just have so much to offer in your presence.
I appreciate that, and I'm humbled by that. And my hope is, my reality, Karen, is at some point I hope to have someone companion with me that understands some of my needs as a woman veteran. And so, in order to create that space, we have to shift the tides a little bit and create this movement where we're talking about it and we're being more open about these unique needs. And we're not just thinking about it 1 month out of the year, we're thinking of it every time we have a team meeting. We're thinking about it every time we take on a new client as doulas. We're thinking about it as we're working in the funeral industries. We're thinking about it because these numbers are going to increase. And so when I think of my end of life, I want to know, and it's my hope, and I envision a world where another woman veteran will hold my hand and will be there. And it may not be a woman veteran. It just may be a volunteer that truly cares, or a doula that truly cares and wants to companion with me, but has learned and is culturally aware and has cultural humility to bring alongside the work and the care that they're going to provide.
I love that term, cultural humility. I think that should actually be what we're striving to achieve here. And I wanted, gosh, there's so many things that we want to touch on in this interview. So I feel like we're just like trying to dive into one topic after another. But I do want to ask you, we brought it up already, the idea of trauma-informed care, and that maybe this is a good time to also bring that in and include how we offer trauma-informed care to veterans.
Yeah, and thinking about the number, there's a small percentage of veterans that receive end of life care through the Department of Veterans Affairs. So where are they getting their care? They're getting their care in their communities. So it's really vital for us as end of life professionals to be aware of the importance of trauma informed care for this population. So some of the things, and in no order at all, there's just things that are just rampant in my brain to be prepared for, is taking on a person family-centered approach, right? While you're working with a veteran, ensure that the environment that you're in with them, they feel safe. The goal is to never re-traumatize them. It may include, they may want to be in a place in their house where they can see a door, or they may not want their back to a door. So just being mindful and just being intentional with the ways that you engage. Thinking about that woman veteran again, and not just a woman veteran, but being mindful as it relates to touch, right? Before you reach out to touch that veteran, ask, is it okay? Be intentional with the way that you engage them. Thinking about some of our Afghanistan and Iraqi veterans who are coming back with traumatic injuries, like a traumatic brain injury, for example, that impacts their cognitions, turning on a light switch can really cause them a really bad day, right? So really being intentional with the way that you engage with that veteran and with his or her family. For clinicians that are serving this population, ensure that you're screening for post-traumatic stress, ensure that you're screening for moral injury and suicidal ideations routinely, not just one time. Let's make sure we're doing it routinely. Suicide is a major factor when, veterans feel like they're a burden on their family. So you want to make sure that you're taking the time to really look at some of those warning signs that pop up to say that there's a problem. You mentioned training, right? Wherever there's an opportunity to obtain training, take it. And also spend time in figuring out how the training that you received, how are you going to transfer it into the work that you're doing, right? I think so many of us take trainings to get certifying credits throughout the year, but really sit back and see how it's going to impact and influence the work and the way that you interact with your client. Seek out resources, right? You may even need to seek out telehealth services to help your veteran client. There's a plethora of resources in your local communities, resources that are statewide, resources that are federal. Be willing to seek those out. There may be times that you have to go outside of your organization to obtain those resources. You may be working with a Latinx veteran, so you may have to find resources that are culturally geared for that population. So don't hesitate to learn what's out there. And once again, telehealth is on the rise. If you're starting to see signs of post-traumatic stress that's increasing, or sort of suicidal ideations that are increasing, reach out to telehealth services. They're in your communities, and also the Department of Veterans Affairs has a telehealth program itself.
Oh, that's really good to know. I didn't realize that Veterans Affairs offered that.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And they also have community programs. In many communities, it's a kind of like a satellite office. They're called vet centers, right? And vet centers oftentimes have telehealth services where they provide services to the veteran and also the family, whereas that's not as readily available in the actual medical center. It's available at a vet center, which is located in the community.
So really, our hospice organizations and even anyone who's just in practice as a death doula, it would be wise to be aware of the veteran services available in your community, whether you have a VA, a hospital, or clinics, or whatever is available, so that you can link veterans up to that if they aren't already connected.
Absolutely. And I think that's if I think what's the low-hanging fruit, it's that. It's not thinking, oh my gosh, I need to know every resource under the sun. Know where to find a medical center because they know where the resources are, right? You can start with them and they'll be able to give you that warm handoff that you may need to get the veteran the appropriate care that he or she is in need of at that time.
That's really helpful. Just just some tips for all of us to keep in mind when we are working with veterans. And I know that trauma-informed care applies to other groups of people as well, beyond veterans too. So the more we learn about it, the more we're serving all of the people that we work with, really, is to be aware of trauma in people's lives. But it does particularly apply to veterans.
Absolutely.
And then I know one other thing I really wanted to learn more about from you is that you've worked on an initiative to help states develop plans to reduce suicide among military and the veteran population. And so I'm curious about what work has been done and where you see the needs that are there and what any of us might be able to do that could be helpful.
Yeah, two things that I have to say that you did that blew my mind. One, that you interviewed Kevin Hines. I actually work on a few different projects with his wife, Margaret Hines. So to see Kevin be featured was amazing. And then also you provided the workshop on suicide. We need more open dialogues. We need more conversations. We're in a place in our society that, we need to discuss suicide because it's a major public health issue. It's I think number 10 in the leading causes of death. And so a bit of my background, of course, is dedicated to the work of suicide prevention. And recently I served as the co-director of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Technical Assistance Center. I know that's a mouthful. I will make sure that you have the link to that website for anyone wanting more information about suicide prevention or just behavioral health systems supporting this population. It's a great resource to have. So in 2018, we started a partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs and SAMHSA to create what's known as their Mayor's Challenge to prevent suicide among service members, veterans, and their families. And once again, we had about 18 to 20 mayors that signed on, that created a collaborative team of federal and state and local stakeholders that wanted to address the challenges that they were seeing in their community and come up with some type of a pilot or some type of a program to reduce suicides in their communities. And from there, the feedback was so great that the federal government said, okay, we need to up the ante a little bit on this. And so they decided to establish the Governor's Challenge to prevent suicide among service members, veterans, and their families. And up till, I want to say October 1, we've had 35 governors to sign on. And the goal is to have all 50 states a part of the Governor's Challenge. And it's been, Karen, that work is absolutely phenomenal, where you're bringing in the military, you're bringing in the National Guard, you're bringing in veteran service organizations, the VA, state agencies that provide mental health services throughout the state, policymakers, just a wide array of stakeholders that come to the table with head work and heart work, and they're ready to roll up their sleeves to really positively impact their behavioral health systems and the way they serve service members, veterans, and their families. And some of the things that we try to get them, and as they're creating their programming or their policy efforts, we try to get them to have some streamlined focuses, right? So we get them to focus on asking the question, having medical providers, having doctors, when a veteran is coming into the office, ask the question, as I mentioned earlier, have you served in the armed forces, or has a loved one of yours served in the armed forces? We focus on lethal means safety. Oftentimes, it's thought that lethal means it's just a firearm, but lethal means can also be prescribed medication. So we're providing opportunities for states to develop programming and training on lethal means safety and safety planning. Our ERs are being trained on working with individuals that are showing up with suicidal ideations in the ER and how to provide care transitions where these individuals are leaving the ER, going back to the community, but there's someone sending them an email or a text message or a physical letter to say, hey, we're thinking of you, we're rooting for you, we care about you. Let's make sure that, 1, 2, 3 are done to ensure your safety and to ensure that your recovery is going well. And the biggest one for me is promoting connectedness, right? When you think of the pandemic, so many of us have been isolated because of the pandemic, but just to promote that connectedness, if you're not hearing, if you haven't heard from a veteran in some time, just checking in on them, finding programs that are related to peer support that can really connect veterans, let them figure out that they're not alone, that there's someone that they can connect with that cares about their recovery, that cares that they want to live a life worth living. We know that roughly between 17 to 22 veterans die by suicide every single day. And when you think about for each suicide, it's estimated that approximately 135 people are impacted. And so oftentimes, when we're having these talks about suicide prevention, suicide is preventable. And suicide prevention spans just veterans. It's everybody's business to take a role in suicide prevention. Everyone, from small kids to the elderly. Everyone can do something. And when I think about attempt survivors or loss survivors or impacted family and friends, there was a model for some time that focused on the negative and the dark, hopeless side of these impacts, whereas now we're looking at the post-traumatic growth, we're looking at healing, we're looking at hope. And I know hope is really a cliche word, but when I think about hope, I like to say hearing other people's experiences, because often hearing someone else's experience, they give someone else the will to live.
That's really beautiful. And I think that's something I learned from Kevin Hines, that he's talking about his experience and he's telling people what he went through, and then having, getting letters from thousands of people who are saying just hearing him tell his story made a difference to them. So you're right. It's so powerful when we just have the intention that we want to make this better. We want to be open and talk about suicide and be aware of people who are dealing with suicidal ideation. Then I think that's the first step, but it's the most important step in many ways that we can take.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of suicide? Right? That's a myth. There's this myth that's been around for so long that asking that question is going to cause that individual to think about it more. But sometimes asking that question and letting them be vulnerable and sharing is their first step to recovery, is their first opportunity to say, yes, and I'm ready to obtain help. I'm ready to journey with someone who may have had a similar journey to mine. But being afraid to ask that question can cause such a challenge for some. So if you feel like, you may feel like someone is extremely depressed or someone is having suicidal thoughts, be okay with asking that question, but also know there's the Veterans Crisis Line. There's, the crisis line that you can call into to get that individual some help.
That's just such important information and such a good reminder for all of us that we have to get over our fear and our discomfort talking about certain subjects, and suicide is one of those that we really have to be more open in our society. So I'm hoping we're making changes gradually, moving forward in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm honored. I actually serve as the division student chair for the American Association of Suicidology. And so it's awesome to be able to provide inspiration and motivation and professional development to those that are giving their work life, I have air quotes up, their work life to this field, right? Because it is hard work. It is hard work. But it's commendable work. It's life-saving work. I tell people all the time, when you choose to be in this field, you're lifesavers. You're lifesavers. And if you save one life, think about how many others can be saved by that one life. And it's just it's purposeful, right? Um, and it there's just it truly perplexes me um, how many people think of taking their lives and feeling as though they're alone when we can have communities step up and stand in and be there for one another and be compassionate and hold that safe space, whether it's on a social media platform or whether it's going to your next door neighbor's house. You don't need any special training to just hold that space and be there.
Wow, that's beautiful, Quinn, and such a good reminder for us. And as I'm seeing our time
I
just
know.
tick away here, and as we were saying, like, how can we possibly cover everything we want to talk about in 1 hour?
Right.
And this nothing has been planned yet, but you and I've talked about perhaps offering a workshop down the road, and we'll put something together. I'll come back and let everyone listening know because we'll do something more so that we can go further into some of these topics down the road. But I wanted to ask you, Quinn, if you have any takeaway messages that you'd like to leave our listeners with as we bring this conversation to a close.
Yeah, I do. That's a good one. Be willing to share the lessons you learn through their service and through your service to veterans. I also want to share the importance of self care. Some of the stories that you may hear along your journey with working with this population may cause compassion fatigue. It may cause or strike up secondary or vicarious trauma. And it's important that you take care of yourself. It's important that you have a support system that you can bounce off your thoughts, you can bounce off your concerns. Um, but I want to commend anyone that is stepping into this space and serving those that served. Your work is an amazing calling. And Karen knows how to reach me. I think she's going to leave it in the call notes. I am here to be of support. My job after leaving the service was continuing to be of service. And I feel that that is my mission, my life's calling. So please do not hesitate to reach out and be willing to share your stories with me. Be willing to share your fears. Be willing to share your vulnerabilities. And what can we do collectively to impact this population so that we can be more compassionate and more aware of their needs at the end of it?
And Quinn, I thank you for that, for those reminders. But I know that you have served as a consultant, and so I just wanted to put that out there. If anyone listening has an organization and you feel like you would like to do a better job working with veterans or creating an outreach program, is that something that you're here to help organizations with if they need that?
Absolutely, absolutely. My PhD is in industrial and organizational psychology, and I really have a strong affinity to training and also recruiting and retention and training for volunteers. So definitely, if there's anyone that wants to connect, that would like to, work on strategic plans or work on implementation plans, strategies to develop these type of programs, I am more than willing to be of service.
And you are so well suited in all of these areas, Quinn, with your life experience and just the training that you've sought out for yourself. And so you're an amazing resource. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all of this wisdom with us.
Oh, Karen, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for just being willing to respond to a veteran with a passionate heart. I mean, I truly appreciate that. And I will never forget your kindness for offering me the opportunity to have this platform.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I look forward to hopefully doing something more in the future down the road. So.
Likewise, exciting.
Yes, definitely. So until then, take care, Quinn.
You too. Thank you, Karen.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Quinn Galloway Salazar. I really appreciated some of her reminders, like particularly to ask all of our patients if they have served in the armed forces. As she mentioned, some of them may not share that information and may not necessarily consider themselves veterans. And so it's helpful if we ask those questions and find out where they served and whether they faced combat or not, in order for us to have a complete picture of who this patient really is. I love that she emphasized the fact that women veterans have different needs than our men veteran patients, and we need to consider that, along with LGBTQ plus veterans, veterans of different religions, and any other population that may feel marginalized, invisible, and excluded from the military community. And then finally, the reminder that Stoicism is a big part of military culture, and to remember that that may interfere with providing good pain and symptom management. So we need to find ways to get beyond that in the way we talk to our patients, particularly letting them know that it's common. Everyone experiences pain and these symptoms. They're not associated in any way with weakness, and that our job is to be here to help alleviate that kind of suffering. So all really good, helpful suggestions from Quinn, and I'm looking forward to brainstorming with her and putting together some sort of a workshop that we hope to offer probably after the first of the year. So stay tuned and I will let you know about that. Come back next week for another interview. Always every Monday, I post something new for you out here. And if you enjoy this content, please be sure to share it with other people who also might like listening in. You can share individual episodes. You can give them the URL for the podcast, or point to them on their podcast platform on their smartphone so that they're able to find it. You can also help out this podcast by following the podcast wherever you happen to be listening, and then leaving ratings and reviews. So until we're together again next week, remember, we're here for love. So face your fear. Be ready for whatever happens next, and love each and every moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.